Okay, today we're going to be learning about solving quadratic equations. In order to solve quadratic equations, we're going to need to use the zero product property. And the zero product property tells us that if we have two terms, let's call them A and B, that are multiplied together and they equal 0, then it must be true that either A is equal to 0 or B is equal to 0. That's the neat thing about the zero product property. There's no other number you can multiply by and get that same number. But if you multiply by 0, you're always going to get 0. So the zero product property, again, says that if you have two terms multiplied together, that one and they equal 0, that one of those terms has to equal 0. So let's see how we're going to use the zero product property with this equation. X squared minus 8x minus 15 equals 0. So, plus 15. So what we're going to do is we're going to have two binomials equal to 0, and we're going to factor, so we get an x and an x. We bring down a negative, and a negative times a positive is another negative. And now we're looking for two numbers that when multiplied give us 15, and then when we add them, we're going to get 8, and that would be 5 and 3. The zero product property tells us that either the first term or the second term has to equal 0. So if the first term equals 0, then x is equal to 5. If the second term is equal to 0, then x is equal to 3. So these are the two solutions for our quadratic equation, where x is equal to 5 or x is equal to 3. The two places on the graph, when the x value is 5, the y value will be 0, or when the x value is 3, the y value will be 0. This is also called finding zeros. Okay, let's solve another equation. 2x squared plus 7x equals 15. Our first step in solving any type of polynomial equation is that you set it equal to 0. So we're going to do that by bringing the 15 over to the other side and making it a negative 15. Or you can think of it as subtracting 15 from each side. And then we're going to go through our factoring procedure. And we bring our x, positive, bring that down. Positive times a negative is a negative. And now we have to think of two numbers when multiplied, but this time not just 15, but 2 times 15, which is 30, that give us 30, that when we subtract them, we're going to get 7. And so if we say 3 times 10, if we subtract 3 from 10, we do indeed get 7. So we're going to put the 10 in the first binomial and the 3 in the second binomial. Remember, the first binomial gets the larger value. Then we have to compensate for that 2 that we multiplied by dividing each constant by 2. We simplify and get x plus 5. And then we would normally bottoms up and get 2x minus 3 equals 0. But we really don't have to do that because we will simplify, and then the second term is already in the form that we want. So we have x plus 5, which would give us x is equal to negative 5. And in the second term, we would just simply have x is equal to positive 3/2. Okay, here's a little bit more complicated one. 6x squared plus 5x equals 35 minus 6x. So our first step, again, is to set the equation equal to 0. So we're going to get 6x squared plus 11x because we bring the 6x over to the other side. And then we're going to get minus 35 equals 0. Then we do the process as before. We multiply the 6 times 35. And then we're going to try to find, when we multiply these, we get the value 6 times 35, but when we subtract them, we get 11. So we're going to use the same procedure we did earlier. We'll divide the first one in half. Multiply the first one by 5, sorry. So 5 times 6 gives me 30. And then we divide the second term by 5, and that gives us 7. But the difference between 30 and 7 is not 11. So we're going to divide the first term by 3, giving us 10, multiply the second term by 3, giving us 21, and then see if that subtraction, 10 from 21, does indeed give us 11. So we're going to go ahead and factor it into two binomials that are going to equal 0. We put x, we put a positive times a negative is a negative, and our 21 comes first, and then our 10. Now remember, we have to recompensate with that 6 in the front, so we're going to divide both of our constants by 6, simplify, and we get x plus 7 over 2, and x minus 5 over 3 equals 0. Setting them equal to 0 and using the zero product property, we know that if the first term is equal to 0, or the second term is equal to 0. If the first term is equal to 0, we get x is equal to negative 7 halves. If the second term is equal to 0, we get x is equal to positive 5 thirds. And that is our final solution. So in order to solve this quadratic equation, x would have to be equal to negative 7 halves, or x would have to be equal to 5 thirds. Here's another example. 6x cubed minus 22x squared is equal to 8x. Again, what is our first thing that we do? We set the equation equal to 0. So we get 6x cubed minus 22x squared minus 8x is equal to 0. Our second step is to always take out what's common. And it's pretty obvious here that all three of these terms have a 2 in common because they're even, and they all have at least one x. So we're going to take out 2x, and then we remainder of 3x squared minus 11x minus 8. Minus 4. Sorry. 2 times 4 is 8. Minus 4 equals 0. So we took a 2x out of each of the terms, and then we're going to follow the same factoring procedure that we did before. We take the 3 and we multiply it by the 4, and we're going to get 12. So we're looking for two numbers that are going to multiply, give us 12, that when we subtract them, we're going to get 11. And it's pretty obvious that that's 12 and 1. So we go ahead and set up our two binomials, and we have x and x, bring down, and we set it equal to 0, bring down a negative, negative times a negative is a positive, and we put our 12 first and our 1 in the second term, and then we have to compensate with the 3 by dividing each of the constants by 3. Simplifying, we get 2x times x minus 4, and x plus 1/3 equals 0. Zero product property says that one of these three terms must be 0 in order to get 0 as our answer. So x would have to be 0 on the first term, because if 2x was equal to 0 and we divide both sides by 2, we get x is equal to 0, or x is equal to 4, or x is equal to negative 1/3. So our three choices are x equals 0, x equals 4, or x equals negative 1/3. Notice we have three solutions, and that's going to tie into the exponent of the leading coefficient at the top. It's a cube, 3, so therefore it has three solutions. A quadratic, which is x squared, is going to have two solutions. X to the 4th will have 4 solutions, and so forth and so on. So that's it for tonight. We're going to do a couple more examples in class tomorrow. Please remember to take notes and come to class with any questions you may have regarding this concept. See you then.